These are 5 workplace stories where someone thought they could lie their way out of trouble, but it didn't end the way they expected. Story 1. The blame game. It happened during our Monday morning meeting when my manager suddenly stopped the presentation and looked straight at me. He said the client report had been sent with the wrong numbers, and according to him, I was the one who prepared it. Everyone in the room slowly turned to look at me. The problem was, I hadn't even touched that report, but my manager kept talking like the situation was already settled. He said mistakes like this could cost the company thousands, and someone needed to take responsibility. Then he added something that made the entire room tense. He told the client that HR was already reviewing the situation, which meant he had reported the issue before the meeting even started. For a moment I just sat there trying to process what was happening. Because if HR was involved, this wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This was my job on the line. My manager kept explaining the situation to the client like the investigation was already finished. He said the report had only been edited by one person. And according to him, that person was me. One of my coworkers even leaned over and quietly asked if I had double-checked the numbers before sending the file. At that point I realized something. Nobody in the room actually knew who edited the report. They were just believing what my manager said. That's when I remembered something important. The report was stored on our shared company drive, and the shared drive records every edit made to every file. So I asked him a simple question. Do you want me to open the version history? For the first time during the meeting, my manager hesitated, but the client immediately said yes. So I opened the file history on the projector screen. And suddenly the room went very quiet, because the last person who edited the numbers wasn't me. It was my manager. He had changed the report late the night before the meeting. The client stared at the screen for a few seconds. Then they slowly turned toward him and asked something that made the entire room uncomfortable. So you reported your own mistake to HR and blamed your employee for it? My manager tried to explain. He said he must have opened the wrong version of the file, but the timestamps told the whole story. The meeting ended not long after that. Later that afternoon, HR called him into a meeting instead. And by the end of the week, the responsibility for sending client reports had quietly been reassigned to someone else. After that day, nobody in the office ever took his accusations seriously again. But the next story is worse, because someone tried to steal credit for a project during a promotion meeting. Story 2. The promotion meeting. This one happened during a quarterly review meeting where our department was presenting results from a project we had been working on for months. The project had taken weeks of late nights, constant revisions, and more meetings than anyone wanted to count. And I had been the one coordinating most of it. But when the meeting started, something strange happened. My coworker Mark stood up and began presenting the project as if it had been entirely his work. At first I thought maybe he was just explaining the overview before bringing me into the conversation. But that never happened. Instead, he kept describing the strategy, the planning, and even the final presentation like he had built everything himself. The room was full of managers, including the director who was responsible for deciding who would receive the next promotion. And Mark clearly knew it. Every few minutes he glanced toward the director while explaining his ideas. Meanwhile, I was sitting there trying to understand what was happening. Because not only had I built most of the project, I had also sent Mark the files the night before so he could review them before the meeting. That's when I realized something. Mark wasn't confused. He was intentionally taking credit. So I decided not to interrupt him. I let him keep talking. He walked everyone through the timeline, the planning, and the final results. He even described a few late nights he claimed to have spent finishing the work. The problem was, those nights were the ones when I had emailed him updates from home. Eventually, the director stopped him. She said the project looked impressive and asked one simple question. Can you show us the development files? Mark confidently opened the project folder on the screen. But the moment the files appeared, something immediately stood out. Because every document listed the same creator name. Mine. Every draft. Every version. Every final file. The timestamps showed the entire project history. And Mark had only opened the files the night before the meeting. The director didn't say anything for a moment. Then she asked Mark another question. So, when exactly did you do this work? Mark tried to explain that we had collaborated on the project. But by that point, the evidence was already on the screen, and everyone in the room had seen it. The meeting moved on not long after that. But the atmosphere in the room had completely changed. Several co-workers stayed behind after the meeting, quietly talking about what had just happened. A few weeks later, when the promotion announcement came out, Mark's name wasn't on the list. And after that meeting, he never tried to take credit for my work again. But the third story might be the most uncomfortable one, because a manager tried to lie to HR about the wrong employee. Story 3. The HR meeting. This one happened at a company where a friend of mine worked in the operations department. One afternoon, his manager suddenly asked him to come into a meeting with HR. He assumed it was just a routine conversation about a small mistake earlier in the week. But when he walked into the room, The situation felt very different. His manager was already sitting there with a printed report in front of him, and HR looked unusually serious. The manager immediately started explaining that a scheduling error had caused the company to lose an important client. According to him, my friend had entered the wrong delivery date into the system, which meant the shipment never arrived when the client expected it. HR asked a few questions about the timeline, and the manager confidently explained that the system showed my friend had entered the order. The problem was, my friend knew that wasn't true, because he hadn't even been working that day. He had taken a vacation day that had been approved weeks earlier. At first he thought maybe the system had recorded something incorrectly, but then he remembered something important. Their scheduling software tracked every login and every change made to an order. So he asked HR if they could pull up the activity history for that delivery. His manager quickly tried to move the conversation forward. He said the mistake had already been investigated and the system was clear. But HR still opened the activity log. For a moment the manager leaned forward in his chair like he already knew what the report would show. He even said something like, "This should clear things up." My friend later said that was when he realized the manager was confident the blame would land on him. HR began scrolling through the activity history on the screen. Every change appeared in a list, with timestamps and usernames beside them. At first it was hard to tell what any of it meant. Then HR suddenly stopped scrolling, because one entry stood out, and the moment the report appeared on the screen, the room went quiet, because the system showed exactly who had entered the delivery date. It wasn't my friend. It was his manager. The order had been edited late the evening before the shipment. HR looked back at the printed report the manager had brought to the meeting. Then they asked him one question. "Why does your report say the employee entered this change?" The manager tried to explain that he must have reviewed the wrong record, but the system log showed the exact time, the user account, and the change made, and every detail pointed back to him. The meeting ended shortly after that. A few days later, my friend heard the manager was no longer responsible for approving delivery schedules. And after that incident, HR started reviewing those reports a lot more carefully. But the fourth story might be the most uncomfortable one, because a manager tried to blame the wrong person during a team meeting. Story 4. The email. This one happened during a weekly department meeting where everyone was reviewing progress on a large client project. The meeting had already been going for about 20 minutes when my friend's manager suddenly brought up a problem. According to him, an important email update had never been sent to the client, which meant the client had been waiting for information they should have received days earlier. Then the manager said something that made the room go quiet. He said the person responsible for sending that email had failed to do their job. And then he said my friend's name. My friend was completely confused, because he clearly remembered sending that email earlier in the week. He had even copied the manager on it. But the manager kept talking like the situation had already been decided. He told the room that he had checked his inbox and the message was never there, which meant the email must never have been sent. A few people in the meeting started glancing toward my friend, because at that point it sounded like the mistake was obvious. The manager even started explaining how the team needed to be more careful about communication with clients. Meanwhile, my friend was sitting there trying to understand what was happening. Because he knew he had sent the email, he even remembered sending it late in the afternoon before leaving work that day. But instead of interrupting the meeting, he quietly opened his laptop. He pulled up his email folder and searched for the message. And within a few seconds the email appeared on the screen. It had been sent 3 days earlier. The subject line matched the exact update the client had been waiting for. Then my friend opened the message. And right there in the recipient list was his manager's email address, along with the timestamp showing exactly when it had been sent. For a moment the manager didn't say anything. Then someone else in the meeting pointed out something else. The email had also been marked as read, which meant the manager had actually opened it already. The room went quiet again. Someone near the back of the table even said, "Wait. So the email was sent after all?" The manager tried to quickly move the conversation back to the project timeline. But by that point, everyone had already seen the email on the screen. And the meeting felt very different after that, because everyone in that room had just watched someone confidently blame the wrong person. After that day, people in the team started double-checking things themselves before accepting what the manager said. And strangely enough, that manager stopped calling people out in meetings after that. But the final story is probably the worst one, because someone tried to accuse the wrong person of stealing from the company. Story 5. The accusation. This happened during a department meeting, when the entire team had been called together unexpectedly. At first it seemed like a normal meeting. People were talking about deadlines and a new client contract the company was trying to secure. But halfway through the meeting, one of the senior managers suddenly interrupted the discussion. He said there was a serious issue that needed to be addressed immediately. According to him, money from a recent client payment had gone missing. And after reviewing the records, he believed he knew who was responsible. The room went quiet, because nobody expected the meeting to turn into something like that. Then the manager looked across the table and said my coworker's name. He claimed my coworker handled the payment transfer, and that the missing money could only have disappeared during that process. My coworker looked stunned, because he knew exactly which payment the manager was talking about. But instead of arguing, he asked one question. He asked if the manager was sure he wanted to discuss this in front of the entire team. The manager said yes. He said if someone was stealing from the company, everyone deserved to know. So my coworker stood up and walked to the computer connected to the meeting room screen. He opened the security system for the payment office, because that room had cameras covering every desk. Then he pulled up footage from the day the transfer was processed. At first, the video showed my coworker working at his desk. Then it showed him finishing the payment and leaving the office for lunch. Everyone kept watching, because a few minutes later, someone else walked into the room. They went straight to the same desk and opened the payment files. And when the person turned toward the camera, the entire room saw who it was. It was the manager who had just accused my coworker. The room went silent, because the footage clearly showed him accessing the files after my coworker left. Then someone at the table quietly asked the obvious question. So, if he left the office, how exactly did he steal the money? The manager tried to say it must be a misunderstanding. But by then, everyone in the room had already seen enough. After that meeting, nobody in the department ever took his accusations seriously again. But situations like this happen more often than people think. Sometimes the person making the loudest accusation is the one hoping nobody looks too closely. And sometimes all it takes is one piece of evidence for the truth to come out. If you enjoyed these workplace stories, there are plenty more like them. So if you want to hear them, stick around, because the next one might sound familiar.